The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Now, on the 12th of November, 5 years from COP21, 10 years after the Sustainable Development Goals, the world's 450 public development banks will be gathering for the first time at the Finance in Common Summit. This summit is emerging from a single conviction that the crisis provoked by the COVID-19 pandemic marks a turning point. They need to redouble efforts to lay the foundations for a fairer, more resilient future where short-term urgency can be reconciled with long-term objectives. The Finance in Common Summit is also born from an intuition that the public development banks have a decisive role to play in resolving the sustainable development finance equation. So who are public development banks? That's the question. 450 of them across the globe and in all the continents, actually. And they now be meeting to discuss what is it that we can do. Public finance, public development banks are these ones that are not commercial. They are the ones that have the support of government, of multilateralism, that basically are looking at how they can help governments in running, in financing many projects, especially development projects, right? So this conference that will be happening in a couple of days' time, that brings all of them together. They are sitting back to look at, okay, COVID, all right. Governments across the globe have really been, hit by COVID. The role of government post COVID-19 is gonna increase in terms of everybody's expectation of what the government should be doing is gonna increase. So what is it that the governments then would need in terms of support on meeting this increased role on this? And for having this conversation, to join us, we're going to have Michael Awori. Michael is the COO of the Trade and Development Bank, and Maud Frangi, she is the project officer, French Development Agency. And this event is going to be taking place in Paris, France. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's start with you, Michael. Just explain to us, what are these public development banks, just so that we can get this clear once and for all.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. So public development banks, I guess the way to think of them is they sort of are at the intersection of the private sector and the public sector, right? Similar to TDB and AFD, we are founded and set up by the national governments, right? And so we pursue the development agenda of the national governments, but we are also, particularly in the case of TDB, very commercial in nature, right? And so we are a way to channel sort of not only national objectives, but sort of national, international policy, right, into action as well. And so we do this through funding various projects within our member states that bring about, again, that sort of concrete development on the ground, again, sort of turn that policy objectives into concrete outcomes, if you will.
Sure. So I guess then another question then for you, Michael, and as Maud as well. Who then is coming into Paris in the next couple of days, and then to say what plans are in place for this summit and what are you hoping to roll out moving forward? So who does this involve? I mean, we're looking at 450 of these organizations. Why them? Who? And then what happens at the summit?
Sure. So as Eric mentioned it, so it's 450 of the world's public development banks sort of gathering in one place to discuss, their role, their ambitions, opportunities and challenges. So it's quite unique, quite groundbreaking, right? In that sense. And these public development banks, the combined work of all of these institutions represents about 10% of the total annual investment made by all public and private sector investors globally, right? Over $2 trillion. So the significant financial resources that these institutions represent, right? And so through this summit, by having all of these actors together, the goal is that we can be mobilized to act in a coordinated manner to guide the changing direction of global finance. So we review that global finance needs an acceleration towards climate and SDGs and sort of addressing these in a little bit more of a concerted effort, as well as in a more coordinated effort. again, public development banks are a significant part of the solution to achieve this. So, in terms of your question in terms of the outputs of the summit, so one of the outputs will be a common statement, right? So this statement will lay out the commitments that these institutions are all signing up to. Commitment, for example, to increase our involvement in specified themes such as gender or climate or agriculture or SMEs, right? And so these themes and these commitments will then together serve as a sort of roadmap for driving a more sustainable recovery. So,
Mr. Awori, if I may ask, these banks, if I were to speak generally, who owns them and then who also funds them?
Right. So when I say that we are at the intersection of public sector and private sector, that kind of gets to your question, right? So in case of TDB, for example, we are owned by the 22 member states that set us up. So Kenya, joining you from Kenya. So Kenya is a founding member of TDB, right? So the African governments that set up the institution are the primary shareholders of the bank. We also then have institutional investors. So you think of your pension funds and your insurance companies and your sort of impact investors that are also investors and shareholders of the bank, right? So we bring together the public sector and the private sector, and then as a wholesale bank. So what that means is we don't have branches, we don't cut deposits. We fund ourselves from the capital that those shareholders inject into the bank, as well as raising money ourselves. So we borrow, and AFD is one of our key partners in this. They provide us with several facilities, and we also borrow internationally. And we take all of that capital and blend it, and that's how we deliver our lending operations.
Maud, if I may direct this question to you, what do you hope to achieve through this conference, and what is it that will be different from what AFD has been doing all along?
As Michael just said, we are waiting for a joint declaration of all PDBs with a very clear roadmap on how to achieve together the Sustainable Development Goals. So what would be different, I think, is to have this common voice on how to reach there. And also the Financing Commons Summit will not only gather public development banks, but as well the financial community at large. And the idea is really to raise awareness about the need to have funding flowing towards investments related to climate, to social sectors, to power. So yes, what we expect once again is to have more awareness and cooperation.
So you're having an entire conference so that you can arrive at a consensus and arrive at perhaps a greater awareness. But what about the tangible results? What are these results that you expect beyond awareness and beyond consensus building? What do you hope to do? After all, you are development banks.
So the tangible effects of actions of development banks can be felt in terms of infrastructures delivered and service delivered at large. So from this conference, the idea is to increase the commitment to have, yes, more infrastructures, yes, more training and capacity building in different regions of the world, and to decrease vulnerability towards climate change.
Okay, can I ask then, I guess this is for both of you, Michael and Maud as well. What have we seen these development banks and institutions having done in the past? That would help us then to understand what moving forward this summit then would be able to produce. What kind of projects, if Kenyans, Ugandans, Tanzanians were looking at this today and said, oh, okay, I have seen this as a result of what this bank had been able to do. Provision of water, boost of electricity here and there. What has been the bane of these projects previously?
Right, right. No, that's a good question, and you know, development outcomes, which ultimately I think is the heart of your question, right? The outcomes from our interventions and our on our financing. That's something that we as an institution track, right? It's part of our DNA. We're 35 years old, and we have a track record of doing this, and we measure those outcomes beyond simply the dollar value, if you will, of money dispersed. So it could be jobs created or sustained, number of SMEs supported, households directly or indirectly supported. So you touched on power, right? That's a great area to start on. That's an area that we look at closely. So we have a very strong focus on renewable energy sources, which is already about 2/3 of our long-term portfolio. So we finance solar, hydro, wind plants, to name a few, and collectively, we delivered over 1 gigawatt of clean, renewable power to national grids across our region, right? So that translates into more reliable and affordable cost of power.
Okay.
So we all know Africa, has ambitions to sort of grow our manufacturing base and industrialization, and one of the key components of that, right, is affordable, reliable power, right? And so we're directly addressing that by support to that sector. In our trade finance business, for example, so that's our short-term lending. We support various companies in the agricultural sector, right? Particularly exports of agricultural products. So in our Southern Africa region, for example, we disperse hundreds of millions of dollars annually to a number of companies, and those companies and those funds directly affect hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers, right? We're talking farmers who on average have maybe an acre, right? But they're now able to save, invest, and send their children to school, diversify their crops, and ultimately we're delivering high impact in creating sustainable outcomes, right, through these interventions.
More, do you
Yes,
want to
for example.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, for example, the partnership between TDB and AFD started in 2017 with a credit line dedicated to infrastructures without targeting specific sectors. And so this line of credit, for instance, financed some hydropower installation in Tanzania, so that contributed to increase the access to clean energy. It also contributed to finance the purchase of specialized equipment for a polyclinic in Madagascar, or the development of telecommunication applications in Zimbabwe. So it can be very, very various sectors targeted. And now the partnership is more focused on climate infrastructures once again. So this one will probably finance more renewable energies solutions in agriculture, or even in transport or energy efficiency technologies in industry.
So in the meeting that you'll be having in Paris in a couple of days' time that brings in all these public development banks, you'd expect that then whatever deliberations you come up with, they'd require support or buy-in from your shareholders. And here the main shareholders would be the governments that you'll be seeking to support. How do you go back now to your shareholders and get their consensus or their buy-in into whatever deliberations you come out with? Michael.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I would say, generally sort of the national interests, right, and sort of the policy goals are often complementary, right? Yeah. We talked about power. We talk about infrastructure, right? All of our countries have a significant infrastructure gap. So we need to build more roads, right? More ports, more long-term infrastructure, right? And so that's obviously an outcome that the wider development sector supports, right? But the policy angle that comes in is how can we do that most effectively, efficiently, taking into account the impact on the environment, right? So the national interest and the development goals, right, will be very complementary in that sense, right? But then we come in to actually help make that reality, to actually help those projects come off the ground. right? And so it's both with the funding, right, that AFD and TDB do directly, but it's also through the softer engagement around those policy aspects. So so we can help the government, for example, think about how can they draft policies, right, to make the environment accommodative and attractive for investors to come in. Because at the end of the day, governments have stretched budgets, right? So as much as there's a big infrastructure gap, government cannot fill that gap themselves. We need private sector to come in. So we can engage with government around creating the environment that's attractive for the public sector to come in and help deliver those projects. And it could be things, again, along the lines of the environmental policy, right? So that's top of mind globally, right? And so having a policy where environmental standards are concrete, they're well defined, and investors can know that sort of what to expect is sort of one area where, again, we can be engaging with government on a softer side, separate from the actual funding of a project, but ultimately it helps to advance the government's goals and development goals that we all as development banks have in common.
But then the assumption here would be that when you all meet together from across the globe, you'll be having something that is common to discuss. Yes, there's the impact of COVID-19 in the entire world, but each part of the world has different needs coming out of this COVID-19. So I'm just wondering, so when you bring in all the PDBs from across the globe, I'm looking at the number of PDBs that we have and from every continent, how then do we bring about the conversation that is Africa-centric or South America-centric or Asia-centric, so that the PDBs in Africa can now have a conversation around, even those in East Africa can have a conversation around what they can do to support governments in Eastern and Southern Africa, like yours, TDB.
Right. Well, it's having so many actors, all right, and we should mention that beyond the development banks, I think as Maud mentioned, public sector is there, so heads of state will be there, academia will be there, philanthropic organizations will be there, right? So it's very, very wide constituencies that will be part of the bigger conversation. But as as TDB sort of representing Eastern and Southern Africa, right, we can be presenting the views of Africa, right? And so each geographical regions to a certain extent is represented in that, and obviously Africa's goals and Africa's needs are something that is top of mind for us, right? We're an African institution. This is our home. We understand what the requirements are on the ground, right? And we can convey that and have that be part of the conversation so that the outcomes, again, are relevant for us.
When you consider your funding, is it premised on any governance issues? Is it premised on any understanding of the corruption indices that are published by organizations like NGO Transparency International, or do you simply fund based on the needs and nothing else?
No. So we take governance very seriously. So as a management team of the institution, we have a board of directors that we report to, right? And that board of directors represents all of our shareholders. So both the public sector shareholders as well as the private sector shareholders. So as I mentioned, we have institutional investors, insurance funds, pension funds, etc. That are part of our shareholder base, and then our ultimate governing body is our board of governors. And as I mentioned at the outset as well, we are a development institution, but we also commercially oriented, right? And so as we operate at that intersection, yes, as a development bank, national development is why we exist, right? And so we address market failures. We take risks that commercial banks aren't willing to take, right? But we do that with both the long-term sustainability in mind, but also with the commercial lens that we operate with, right? So the project has to make commercial sense. The project has to deliver commercial returns, right? So we're not, sort of a purely policy sort of arm of any government to purely deliver a policy project, right? We ensure that the projects again deliver commercial returns, as well as address the environmental and social governance aspects. And in all of the procurement particularly in the private sector, but also on the public sector. All right, we follow very closely the procurement laws of each country and ensure that we don't fund a project where there's questions around how a tender was awarded or around how a concession was awarded. Right, we take that very seriously because ourselves, again, being a wholesale bank, we have to go raise money internationally, right? And so we have to be able to have that confidence and sort of project that confidence so that we can bring all that global capital to Africa to deliver these projects.
Okay, one last question for you, Mordan. And so coming out of Paris, when this is all said and done, then on a global scale, or, on the stage, regionally even, do we then expect to see more activity to be able to help out, especially for those areas that were hardest hit by COVID?
Of course, that's one of the goals, and there are some actions that have to be taken in the short run. And actually, public development banks have really shown their crucial counter-cyclical role in the past months, and they will have to keep showing that in the coming ones to exit the crisis and support the sectors that are being highly impacted, and even the private sector in general, as well as addressing the development agendas of the different governments. And in the long run, of course, the pandemic has revealed how vulnerable we can be in terms of health infrastructures and global shocks in general, so climate change as well. Of course, so yes, the idea is really to increase commitments and activities depending on the specificities of each country.
Thank you very much. Maud Frangi is the project officer, the French Development Agency, AFD, the Kenya office, and Michael Awori, who is the COO for the Trade and Development Bank, TDB. Asanteni sana for speaking to us. This is in the run-up to the conference that's going to be happening, the summit, Finance in Common Summit, happening on the 12th of November 2020 in Paris. That brings in together 450 public development banks from across the globe. We wish you all the best in your deliberations, and thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.